One.
Alrighty then. So, my name is Jacob Warfield. I will be refuting the claim made by Ms. Haley Gallian that private and public schools equally prepare students for college. In her speech, she argued that in regards to teaching staff, they are equivalent, and actually public schools are somewhat better because public schools hire more specialists. I will refute this by pointing out that the specialists do not necessarily help, and in fact, the fields that public schools hire specialists in are not as related to, are not as well for preparing students for college. She also argued that class sizes were pretty much similar. I will rebut this by pointing out that class sizes have very little impact on overall performance. It could actually hurt performance. And finally, she concluded with the assertion that the test scores between schools are very similar, and in some cases, public schools may even outperform private schools. I will prove that this is not the case. So let's start with staff quality. In her claim, she made mention that public schools hire more, statistically more specialists than private schools. Well, she got this claim from the National Center of Educational Statistics survey of characteristics of private, public, and Indian educational systems. What she does not mention is that the same survey breaks down what these specialist fields are. While it is true that private schools hire less, they do hire more in math and sciences. More specifically, private schools hire 51.9% math specialists, 38.3% science, and 68.6% reading. Public, by contrast, is 31.6 for math, 16.3 for science, 79.8 for reading. They have a considerably higher priority on reading and liberal studies classes in general. Why this is important is that these classes do not necessarily help prepare students for college, not as much, are not in areas like math and sciences where students tend to struggle more and need more help. It should also be noted that when parents are asked, they tend to favor private schools more. A Gallup survey found that teacher and school quality favorability among private and public schools among parents, that 80% of parents found private schools to be of either satisfactory or excellent quality, as compared to 47% for public. Teacher quality is an important thing, and this is what is really the determining factor between private and public schools. This is why class sizes do not particularly help, as attempts to reduce class sizes do not really help with overall quality and can actually hurt it. According to the Brookings Institute, to reduce a class size to 1/3 would require you to hire 50% more teachers. This puts a bigger strain on school resources, makes it harder to control for quality, and generally has more ill-prepared and unqualified teachers hired. Finally, it should be noted that Ms. Gallian bases her claim heavily on star test statistics. The problem is many conclusions that have been made of these have come under fire because of how ill-suited the tests are for controlling for the variable of class size. The STAR tests basically measure overall school quality. They do not measure by class size and do not control for that variable. And speaking of tests, we shall move on to perhaps the more important thing, the SATs. SATs are important because they are what colleges use to determine students. Now, while it is indeed true that public and private schools may compare, the big difference is that private schools have higher SAT turnout, which means they also have all the good and bad scores combined. In fact, for private schools, taking the SAT is mandatory. In addition to this, they also have stricter behavior and academic requirements for graduation. This in turn just makes them more appealing to colleges. Better behaved students, better performing students, makes better college students. And this combined with teacher performance and parent satisfaction and class sizes is why I say that private schools are indeed better than public schools for preparing students for college. All under control.
I've been in this room, not this room. I've been in here all day.
All right, the main claim's labeled. I think that you're previewing the secondary points in a more complicated way than necessary. Just remind us of what the secondary points that the advocate presented, and then as you get to those points in the course of the argument, give your response. You're kind of like, here's what their point is, and here's what my response is going to be, and here's what their point is, and here's what my response is going to be, and that gets a little complicated.
Too much planning.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're giving us a roadmap with too many details, like they said, too many notes. Hard to follow. So keep it a little bit simpler. When you get to the first point, I think you do a pretty good job explaining the idea of the specialists and even using the advocate's own evidence to indicate where those specialities on the teachers are and contrasting them. I do think you need to have a clear explanation about why the math and science ones are more important. Reading seems to be a pretty significant issue, but it may be because you're doing a comparison between higher level grades or lower level grades or something along those lines. So I'm not sure whether or not the inference that you're making there is the valid one. On the standardized tests and evaluation, I think you do kind of give us a general idea on this, but it really turns into an argument about class size. And the class size argument, you explain the concept here. Well, how does it apply to the argument that the advocate presented? I think that needed to be a little bit clearer. And there's a point later on when you're talking about the SAT, for instance, it's right toward the end, where you mentioned that SAT, it's turnout that seems to be the key issue. Well, you need to explain what that means. And you say that it's mandatory for private schools to be using the SAT. And again, what does that mean in the long run? I guess the idea here is that there are arguments here, but they're not always completely explained. For example, on the SAT thing and being mandatory, that you might be able to, for instance, to go to a public high school and get into a college or university simply because of your class rank or your GPA. But if you're coming from a private high school, in order to be accepted at maybe the university level, they require SAT exams. I don't know. That was kind of the inference that I was making when you said it was required, and that would make sense. But I don't know that that's what you're talking about. So you need to explain those arguments. I thought you did a very nice job presenting to the audience for being such a horny little devil.